James has a colleague at work named David. David is 51. He drives a 9-year-old Nissan Altima with a small dent above the rear wheel that he has never bothered to fix. His work bag is a basic canvas tote he got free at a conference in 2019. He takes his lunch in a container from home most days, occasionally joins the team for pizza on Fridays, and has never once mentioned money in any conversation James can remember. He is, by every visible surface measure, an unremarkable middle-aged man with an unremarkable life. Last spring, David mentioned, almost in passing, that he was thinking about retiring next year. James laughed politely, assuming it was one of those half-serious jokes people make when a meeting runs long. Then, a mutual colleague quietly told James that David had been maxing out every tax-advantaged account available to him since 1998, owned 2 rental properties outright, and was sitting on an investment portfolio worth somewhere north of $2 million. James drove home that evening in his 3-year-old leased BMW and thought about it the entire way. This is a story about what wealth actually looks like in real life, not what it looks like on social media, not what it looks like in commercials, not what the algorithm wants you to believe it looks like. 13 signs, hiding in plain sight, that someone around you has built real, lasting, quiet financial freedom. And if you can train your eye to see them, you will stop copying the wrong people entirely. Sign 1. Their car is aggressively average. Start with the most visible signal because it is the one that reshapes your entire mental map the fastest. The most common vehicle owned by American millionaires, according to large-scale wealth research, is not a German luxury brand. It is a Toyota. Second place goes to Honda. Third is Ford. Meanwhile, research consistently shows that the overwhelming majority of luxury vehicles on the road are driven by people who are not wealthy, people who are financing the appearance of wealth at several $100s a month, while their savings account sits flat. James knows a man named Gerald who spent 11 years driving the same Corolla he bought used in his early 30s. Every couple of years, someone in his social circle would suggest he upgrade. Gerald would shrug and say the car started every morning and got him where he needed to go. When Gerald sold his small manufacturing business at 58, the proceeds, after tax, were just over $4 million. The Corolla is still in his driveway. The secretly wealthy person is not making a philosophical statement about materialism when they drive something boring. They simply ran the math and decided that impressing strangers at traffic lights was a poor return on investment. Sign 2. Your house surprises you. Quietly wealthy people almost always live in homes that feel slightly underwhelming relative to what you assume they could afford. The research on this is consistent. Genuinely high net worth individuals tend to cap their housing spend well below what their income could theoretically support, because they understand something that most people learn too late. Your mortgage payment is not just a housing cost, it is the lid on your entire financial life. It determines how much freedom you have, how much risk you can absorb, and how quickly you can stop needing a paycheck. The person who stretched to buy the largest house their approval letter would allow has locked themselves into a monthly obligation that touches every other decision they make. The person who bought something modest and paid it down aggressively has quietly removed the single largest constraint most adults carry for their entire working lives. James thinks about his own neighborhood. 3 houses down lives a woman named Patricia. Her house is the smallest on the block. The landscaping is tidy but not extravagant. She has lived there for 19 years without renovating a single room, as far as anyone can tell. She retired at 57. Nobody saw it coming. Sign 3. You cannot identify their clothes. Genuinely wealthy people wear things you cannot place, No logos, no recognizable branding, nothing that communicates a price point from across the room. This is not because they can't afford better. It is because they have zero interest in using clothing to perform financial status for an audience that mostly doesn't care anyway. David, James's colleague, wears the same rotation of unremarkable button-down shirts he presumably owns for years. His watch is a plain analog piece that could have come from any mid-range department store. He looks like a man who shops efficiently. He looks, in other words, exactly like someone who has $2 million and zero interest in telling you about it. Sign 4. They built it themselves quietly. Here's the statistic that dismantles the inherited wealth narrative entirely. The vast majority of American wealthy, research consistently puts this figure well above 70%, received no meaningful inheritance. They didn't start from money. They came from ordinary households, sometimes genuinely struggling ones, and they built what they have through decades of deliberate, consistent, largely invisible financial behavior. And here's the counterintuitive twist. Adult children who receive regular financial support from wealthy parents tend to accumulate significantly less net worth over their lifetimes than peers who received nothing. The transfers teach them to consume at a level their own income cannot sustain, and they spend years running to stay in place. The secretly wealthy person in your life almost certainly has a backstory that would surprise you. James eventually asked where David grew up. The answer was a small apartment above a dry cleaning shop in a mid-sized Midwestern city. His parents clipped grocery coupons every week until he left for college. Sign 5. Their job sounds unimpressive. Forget the glamorous career narrative. Surveys of actual millionaires routinely show that the most commonly represented professions are engineers, accountants, teachers, and operations managers. Not hedge fund partners, not startup founders, not the professions that get celebrated in business media. The quietly wealthy person very often runs or works in something deeply unglamorous, a regional plumbing supply company, an industrial equipment rental business, a chain of self-storage units, a small accounting practice that has served the same client base for 30 years. These are businesses that do not generate interesting dinner party conversation. They generate reliable cash flow year after year, and the owners reinvest that cash flow instead of spending it on things that announce their success. James has a neighbor who owns a septic tank servicing company. He has driven the same truck for 8 years. He smells faintly of work on weekends. He paid cash for his last vacation home. Sign 6. They know their numbers cold. Ask a secretly wealthy person their approximate net worth, and they will give you a number. Ask them their monthly savings rate, and they will give you a percentage. Ask them how their portfolio is allocated, and they will give you a breakdown. They are not showing off, they are reporting, the way a pilot reports on instrument readings, because those numbers are how they navigate. The average American adult cannot answer any of those questions with confidence. Studies on financial literacy consistently show that a large portion of households have no clear picture of their own net worth, savings rate, or investment allocation. They have a vague feeling about their finances, not actual data. David, James eventually learned, has kept a simple net worth spreadsheet updated quarterly since he was 29. Not because he's obsessive, because he decided early that you can't steer something you can't measure. Sign 7. They have not carried debt in years. The quietly wealthy person has almost certainly not paid interest on a credit card in a very long time. They use cards for the points, the purchase protections, the convenience, and they clear the full balance every single month without exception. Consumer debt, to them, is not a tool or a necessity. It is a drain they permanently removed from their financial life sometime in their 30s and never reinstated. This extends beyond cards. They do not finance furniture. They do not take personal loans for experiences. They do not casually tap home equity for things that depreciate. They have internalized at a structural level that paying interest on consumption is simply surrendering their future purchasing power to a bank in exchange for things that will be worth less next year. James calculated once, after that drive home thinking about David, how much interest he had paid across his car lease, his credit card balance, and a personal loan he took out 2 years earlier for a bathroom renovation. The number made him put down his phone and sit quietly for a few minutes. Sign 8. They are vague about what they do. Pay close attention to how people answer the question, "What do you do?" The quietly wealthy person gives you a short, general answer and immediately redirects the conversation back to you. "I run a small business. I work in logistics. I'm in real estate." Full stop. And then, "What about you? How long have you been at your company?" The people who are performing financial status, by contrast, give you the title, the company, the team size, the recent win, the upcoming project, and 3 name drops before you can finish your drink. They need you to register their position in the hierarchy. The quietly wealthy person already knows their position and has no particular need for you to validate it. Behavioral economists call this counter-signaling. When your status is genuinely secured, advertising it offers almost no return. It is specifically the people in the middle of the distribution who signal loudest because the signal is doing work that actual wealth does not need done. James eventually learned that David owns a small commercial property on the edge of town. Nothing impressive, a strip of 3 retail units that has been leased to the same tenants for years. David has never mentioned it once in 10 years of working in the same office. Sign 9. There is always something running in the background. Quietly wealthy people almost always have multiple income streams that they never volunteer information about. A rental property generating monthly cash flow, a dividend portfolio that sends deposits to their account automatically, a small side business their colleagues at their day job have no knowledge of, royalties from something they built years ago and still collect on. Tax data consistently shows that high net worth households are significantly more likely to report 3 or more distinct income sources than average households. The key word, again, is quietly. They are not running courses about it. They are not building a personal brand around it. The duplex they purchased in 2011 has been quietly depositing money into their account every month for 13 years, and the only person who knows about it is their accountant. James eventually learned that David owns a small commercial property on the edge of town. Nothing impressive, a strip of 3 retail units that has been leased to the same tenants for years. David has never mentioned it once in 10 years of working in the same office. Sign 10. They live where they are the ceiling, not the floor. This one is subtle, but financially significant. Quietly wealthy people tend to live in neighborhoods where they are among the more affluent residents, not the least. They are the nicest house on the block, not the smallest house in the zip code they stretched to afford. The behavioral economics research on this is clear and consistent. When you live among people who have noticeably more than you, nicer cars in the driveway, bigger renovations, more elaborate vacations, you spend more. Not because you are weak or shallow, but because social context shapes what feels normal. Your consumption baseline adjusts upward to match your environment. The quietly wealthy person removed this pressure deliberately. They chose the neighborhood where their lifestyle was already at or above the local norm, which means the ambient social signal around them reinforces saving rather than spending. Sign 11. They play serious defense. Most people think about wealth building as an offensive exercise. Pick the right investments, find the right opportunity, time the right move. An offense matters, but the research on investor behavior tells a humbling story. Studies tracking individual investor returns over multi-decade periods consistently show that average investors dramatically underperform the market indexes they're invested in because they panic sell during downturns, performance chase during rallies, and constantly tinker with portfolios that would do better left alone. The quietly wealthy person wins in large part by simply not losing. They don't sell when the market drops. They don't chase whatever asset class had the best year. They don't move everything around every time a headline frightens them. They bought a boring, diversified portfolio years ago, and they've been ignoring it with impressive discipline ever since. James asked David once during a market correction that had everyone in the office anxious whether he was worried about his investments. David said he hadn't checked them in several months and saw no particular reason to start now. Sign 12. Their time horizon is longer than your career. The quietly wealthy person thinks in decades, not quarters, not years, decades. They bought their investment property planning to hold it for 20 years. They started their index fund contributions planning to leave them untouched for 30. They chose their employer partly based on a pension structure that vests over 15 years and then stayed. This long time horizon shows up in every category of their life. They drive the car until it stops reliably running. They use the kitchen until the appliances actually fail. They hold the same investment positions through multiple market cycles without reorganizing them every time conditions shift. Compounding requires time above almost everything else, and they have made peace with a payoff schedule that most people find psychologically unbearable. James once asked David whether he ever regretted the choices that kept his life looking so ordinary for so long: the undramatic house, the practical car, the decades of automated savings transfers while friends were spending more freely. David thought about it for a moment and said that he had wanted to retire at 52 and was going to do exactly that. And no, he did not particularly regret the Ultima. Sign 13, the deepest sign, this one, if you really absorb it, reframes your entire understanding of what money is actually for. Quietly wealthy people evaluate almost every financial decision through a single lens. Does this purchase give me more freedom or does it give me less? The luxury lease gives you a beautiful car and costs you flexibility for 3 years. The paid-off practical car costs you social signal value and gives you several $100s a month of options. The enormous mortgage buys you a livable home and handcuffs you to an income requirement for 30 years. The modest mortgage buys you a livable home and quietly purchases your ability to leave a bad job, take a year off, or retire a decade earlier than your colleagues. The secretly wealthy person figured out at some point before most of their peers that money is not the destination. Time is the destination. Freedom is the destination. Money is just the most efficient tool humans have invented for acquiring those things. And every dollar spent performing wealth is a dollar that cannot be converted into the actual thing wealth was supposed to buy. James eventually started his own monthly index fund contribution. Nothing dramatic, just an automated transfer he set up one Tuesday evening after getting home from work. He drives the BMW for the rest of the lease, and then he's not renewing it. He started eating lunch from a container 3 days a week. His neighbors have not noticed any of this. That is, of course, the entire point. The most reliably accurate thing you can say about real wealth is that you almost never see it coming. It doesn't announce itself at parties, it doesn't show up in driveways or on wrists or in renovation updates in neighborhood Facebook groups. It shows up quietly, years later, in a retirement that surprises everyone, in a check written without blinking, in a person who simply needed to prove anything to anyone a long time ago. Look around you differently from now on. The dent above the rear wheel might be the most expensive thing in the parking lot.